the physician-patient privilege and the psychotherapist-patient privilege. The physician-patient privilege is what we mean by this privilege is simply if the patient would tell the physician something other than the physician cannot disclose the contents of that communication. The argument for this privilege is to make sure the patients would not have any hesitation in telling the physicians about their illness. We need this privilege. But some people do not agree. Some people would say this physician-patient relationship is really different from this attorney-client relationship. If there is a client, he would go to attorney to seek legal advice. Of course, the client understands very well there could be a court action. There could be a lawsuit involved. So in that situation, we need to have this attorney-client privilege. But people would say when a patient goes to a physician, in most cases, the patient would not thinking about there could be like a lawsuit, there could be a court battle. So some people argue we cannot really say this physician-patient relationship is the same as attorney-client relationship. So because of this disagreement, not all states recognize this physician-patient privilege. Some states recognize this privilege. Some other states do not recognize this privilege. So that is what we need to know about this physician-patient privilege. And then we have this psychotherapist-patient privilege. In this situation, of course, we know we are not talking about the patient goes to a physician for this physical illness. Here we are talking about this patient goes to a psychotherapist because of some mental problem. So it is not really physical illness. Now we are talking about this mental problems, mental illness. So it is important for us to know, even though not all states recognize the physician-patient privilege, all states, including the federal jurisdiction, recognize this psychotherapist-patient privilege. So it is very important for us to know all states recognize this privilege. Federal jurisdiction also recognizes this privilege. This point actually was made by the U.S. Supreme Court in this Jeffy versus Redmond. This is the U.S. Supreme Court decision. What happened in this case was this was not a criminal case, and in this case there was a police officer. It was a female police officer who responded to a call. It was a call about there was a fight in an apartment complex. So this officer responded to the call, and then over there the officer claimed he saw a person, actually that was a deceased person, who came out of this apartment building and with a knife, and then the officer said he ordered the person to drop the knife, and then the person did not do it, so that's why she opened the fire, and then he killed the person. But of course, the deceased family was saying the person was not armed, and then that was really, the officer was not justified in using deadly force in the situation. So the family of the deceased person sued the police department for compensation. So this was a civil lawsuit. And then the issue in the case was this. After this police officer, after this incident, this shooting incident, this police officer came back to the police department, and then this officer consulted with the police department's social worker, for psychological counseling. So at trial, the plaintiff just argued this police department should disclose the contents of this consultation. And then, even though the police officer said in court this deceased person was armed, and then the plaintiff wanted to see what this police officer actually said to the social worker during this psychological counseling session. But the police department would not disclose these consultation records, and then the police department argued this communication should be protected by this psychotherapist-patient privilege. At that point, it was not clear whether we should or should not have this privilege in the federal jurisdiction. So that's why this case went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The ruling of the Supreme Court was this communication, this police officers' communication to the social workers should be protected by this psychotherapist-patient privilege. The court says in the federal jurisdiction, we should have this privilege because the court actually made 2 points. The first one was that this privilege is necessary to ensure effective treatment of patients with mental illness. What the court said in the case was, and when we are talking about this treatment of mentally ill patients, and the court said we should all understand, if a person does not want to disclose his physical illness, if the person has whatever the physical illness and disease in general, maybe the person would be embarrassed to disclose that. But the court said when we come to this mental problem, when we come to this mental illness, the patient would be more reluctant to disclose his conditions. So if we do not have this privilege to make sure the psychotherapist would not disclose this information, these patients with mental illness would be discouraged to fully disclose their conditions. If they would not communicate freely and fully to the psychiatrists or maybe psychologists or social workers, and then these psychotherapists could not provide effective treatment. So for this reason, the court said the federal jurisdiction should also recognize this privilege, this psychotherapist and patient privilege. Of course, the court said to recognize this privilege is not only for the reason of making sure there would be effective treatment to patients with mental illness. Actually, this privilege is also necessary for protection of society. Because in society, if this, for the interest of the society, if we have these mentally ill patients, if they could not receive this effective treatment, and then these mentally ill people, they would also be a problem for society, and they would also cause a lot of troubles on the street. So the court said, one, for the purpose of making sure we can provide effective treatment to the patients, we should have the privilege. And secondly, and for the reason of protecting society, we should also recognize the privilege so that these mentally ill patients could receive proper treatment so that they would not cause any problem to society at large. So important for us to know in this case, the court said in the first federal jurisdiction we should have this psychotherapist-patient privilege. So for this case in particular, of course, the police department could not be compelled to disclose the contents of this psychological counseling the police officer actually sought with this social worker.